behaviors. I think the time is right for us to have very serious conversations about how we can guarantee the safety of our young ones. But as Keith said, I don't have great answers either. The word that keeps coming to mind to me for addressing this issue is vigilance, and it's vigilance in a lot of regards. And I think it starts with parental vigilance. If people can learn and understand that their young people, as they grow, go through processes and they mature, and sometimes things happen that send red flags up, and we need to be able to identify those. I think also school personnel, medical personnel, mental health personnel, just community members on the street, coming back to it takes the village to raise the child. It also takes the village to keep an eye on the child and make sure that they're developing properly, and that if something is going awry in that young adolescent, that sends red flags out, that people do step forward and try and identify those issues when they come. I have a grave concern about how we are maybe missing the boat with adolescent development when things start to go off track. And as Keith said, and I worked in the world of high school counselors for many years, we don't have enough of them. This isn't something we screen for. It isn't something we have the resources to be able to screen for. And we screen for scoliosis and vision and hearing, but mental health isn't something that we take a look at in adolescence as kids are beginning to have that maybe diversion from a path that's healthy for them. So that's something that I would like to have a conversation about. As Keith said, the gun control issue is something that can happen in another venue. There's a bill that's already been dropped in Oregon that's to limit the magazine clips. Jenny Burdick took care of that. There's another bill that has been proposed by Mitch Greenlick. That's something that is already in the works, and it has to do with providing some bonding capacity so that schools can have a little bit of money to do things that involve safety, whether it's cameras or locks or fences or a number of things that can provide opportunities for cash-strapped school districts to increase their ability to create a safe environment for students. So I'm just delighted to be here today. I think this is a very important discussion that's going to go on during this entire session. I'm just very interested in what you all have to say and how we can move forward to make sure that all of our children and all of our communities are a safe place to be and a safe place to grow, and I'll leave it at that.
So again, I want to thank all of you for being here, and I think as the day goes on, what we're both here for is to hear from you, because there's a lot more ideas out there with you, and you are the community people who are here at the point of contact with all the things that could go wrong or right, and it is ways in which we can support efforts that are being done here that we want to hear about, so that as the time goes on, we can make some notes and start having a conversation about how can we do that. But to start with me in school safety, actually Caddy just mentioned the idea about getting the patrol people on the streets to help kids get to school. I was a patrol boy in 1958, and I had a flag, and I had a little uniform, and I was a dyslexic, hyperactive kid, and the school felt it was really good to get me out of the classroom and go take care of Highway 101 that went right in front of our school. And so we went out every afternoon, and it was really exciting for me. One of the few things I did well in elementary school. But I do remember that I got in an argument with the principal about, we had this really detailed thing. You went out, you did the crossing guard thing, and then you came back and you put your flags back. And I told him, because most of the time in the 1950s, we were worried about an atomic attack. And one of our deals was we do these evacuations where you go out. I said, you know, if it's really true, I'm not bringing my flag back. I'm just going home. Last kid crossed, I'm home. And they finally said, okay, that'll be okay. It is interesting as I've gone through and as a principal how your mind changes as you get to know more information. And I really want to say that the whole conversation, and I'm really happy that it was set by Keith, about gun rights issues is not really part of this conversation. Those things will happen, but that has nothing to do with school safety, or very little in my opinion. It's a conversation we have to have politically, and we will figure out whatever we're going to do, nationally and otherwise. But the real issue is the day-to-day, how do we make people safe? And if you really think about safety in public schools, the number one issue that I believe is there is suicide. It's not whether somebody else is going to come and take the life of someone. It's that the actual kids take their own lives while they're in high school. And in my 32 years of being at Marshfield High School, I will tell you that the things that haunt me the most are all of those kids that I know, and I don't forget any of them, because each one of them was a personal attack on my sensibilities about figuring out what could I have done differently. And one, in fact, was a student who was an aide in my office, at the dean's office, who took his life the day before graduation. So each one of those is as real today as they were at the time when it happened. And I see that as a major public safety issue around this country. And how do we go about having real conversations that make our place, our schools safe for every individual that's here? The big events like what happened back east and the ones that happened in other places, we do have to prepare for them. And I want to say, as a high school principal, the Thurston shooting was probably the biggest rude awakening for us at Marshfield High School. Our closest competitor in athletics was Thurston when I was a principal. They had football teams that were close. They had a dance team. Our dance team and their dance team have performed together for years. And we got really close after the Thurston thing. We raised money for their school to do things, and we had conversations, and I talked to that principal a lot, who was having a nervous breakdown at the time, the athletic director, who was having a really difficult time coming to grips with the whole situation, especially when you consider that it was their own family. I mean, the shooter was a child of a teacher in 2 of the school districts. It was a major event, and I will tell you that the first thing I realized was that we had people wanting us to get on our television and tell people what was happening, how many people, and all that kind of stuff. And I said, you know, if I'm a high school administrator, I'm not talking to the news. They don't have any clue what's really going on. They're making suppositions. They're hearing from rumors. Until we hear directly from the police department, and they're not going to talk to us until they get the situation under control. We're not going to talk about any of those numbers, because that only exacerbates everything else. It causes more problems than it helps. And so we tried to stay as calm as we could at our school, trying to figure out and wait. And it was a couple days later before we really knew what the numbers were and all those kinds of things. But we made a real decision after that at Marshfield. We had a conversation with the school board whether we needed to have metal detectors at our doors. We had conversations about a whole lot of other things. And you know, the local community came together as well. We had always had in the dean's office, which was where I was the disciplinarian portion, we had always had a person there from the time I got there. His name was Dick Georges. He was a retired county police officer. He was part of what we had. But the city came forward and put in resource officers at our school and justified it on the fact that the largest population of people in this town at any one point during school was right on campus. And a lot of the issues that had to happen with respect to contacting suspects and doing stuff really happened at the school. And having a resource officer who was developing a relationship with kids that could be developed in ways that let people know that the police were really there to help and in all sorts of facets. When it came to child abuse, we had a person at our school we could talk to about it, made teachers more comfortable with doing their mandatory reporting. I mean, all of those things, it was a really great opportunity for us to talk about public safety and those things. And the other thing we came to the conclusion is metal detectors. I've always thought that kind of a crazy answer. It's kind of like whenever you come up with a simple solution to complex problems, they're almost always wrong. What you do with metal detectors is you narrow the place where everybody has to come in, so it makes a really interesting event for somebody that's standing outside if they want to take shots. Number 2, if they really want to get in, the first thing they do is they go to the metal detector and they shoot the people that are there. So I mean, I couldn't understand that one, and what we came to the conclusion was, with the 70 staff members that were there, we realized we had 70 eyes looking around and trying to figure out what was wrong. But with the 1,200 students that were there, we kind of made it much better if every one of them were also part of the solution. So we had real conversations, and they knew people in Thurston. They had contact with those Thurston kids. It all of a sudden became real to them. And I think the kids took it very seriously, that it was partly their responsibility to keep themselves safe, and the community in the same way. And so it was, how do we talk to each other in ways that don't create a problem where people get more angry? And can you also make sure that if you know something is wrong, don't assume somebody else is going to tell. Come into our office and let us know so we can take care of the situation. And we had a number of incidents that never got to school because people came and talked to our resource officer and others, and things got taken care of long before they came to school. And I will tell you that to me, was the safest way to make things safe in schools, is to have real conversations with all of the students and let them understand that they are part of the solution. It also helps, we passed a bill last session from Senator Berger on cyberbullying. The whole bullying concept, we also have to go before that on bullying, so we have to have school policies on it. Truthfully, if there's one thing that came to the bottom line with regard to most of the suicide issues that took place in our school, those kids felt alone, and they felt like there was nothing, no hope for them left. And there was at least one situation in just about every one where there was some kind of bullying that took place, or at least their own perception of the bullying. It may not have been the intention of other people. And so having real conversations with people about what it takes and what you feel like and making it personal to them so that they don't feel like they have to do that is really an important conversation that should happen in every school and carry over to the whole community. And so I think as we dwell into this, it's that kind of thing. And then it's figuring out what can we do as a society to help meet the needs of the people that are having that problem. And so as we've talked with a lot of people, kids with mental disturbances in high schools in particular, a lot of times schizophrenia and those other things don't show themselves until high school or just after high school. But those mental health issues, as that person is going through this change, can be overwhelming and lots of bad things can happen. So making sure that people feel comfortable about talking about this. You know, for most of my life, the conversation in families about mental illness was always to cover it up. We really didn't have a conversation about it. And yet it is just as common, or maybe more common, than a regular illness, right? And it is an illness. It is exactly the same kind of illness. And there are treatments that we can do, but if we leave it unattended, it will come back to haunt us over and over again. So we had a meeting. I'm on the Judiciary Committee this session in the Senate. I'm also on the Joint Committee on Public Safety. We've had a hearing, an interim group that worked on public safety, and we're trying to figure out how to deal with that. One of the people say that really what we're trying to do is figure out how to cut the costs. That's obviously part of it, but the issue is really, how do we look at public safety maybe in a different way and figure out how do we make sure that those people who are the most serious get dealt with the most seriously. And those people, because there are really good criteria that the police have developed over time about identifying who that really criminal mind is, and how do we take those people who really, it was an aberrant part of their life, some condition caused it, and they really don't aren't as big a risk. How do we make sure that those people who are not the big risk don't get put in situations that make a bigger risk down the line? So how do we figure out to make our public safety system better than it is? And we had a full-day session last Friday with the Judiciary Committee on public safety and mental health. And we heard from some national experts about the kinds of things that are happening from Texas to Utah to hopefully Oregon, about better ways to deal with citizens who have mental illnesses, because it is not against the law to have a mental illness, but it's against the law to do something if you have a mental illness that causes harm to other people. So how do you prevent it before it happens? And that was a conversation. They have a mental health court in Marion County. It's one of the few counties that do. There's a couple other places that are doing similar kinds of things, where they try to figure out and identify those people within their community that continue to show up on the docket all the day and it costs them a lot of money, and streamline it so that they end up in front of the same judge over and over again as opposed to different things. They talked about a particular person who had in the previous year 75 contacts, and the DA talked about it in a year period. And he started thinking about 75 contacts, which means the public defender was assigned to that person 75 times, because these were actual cases where they had to come to court. And there was a police officer that had to show up on the day, whatever was happening. And this person was put in jail for a period of time before they got released or whatever. All of the money that was spent on that individual, could there not be a better way? And each time it was a different case in front of a judge. After a while, there's only so many judges, you're going to see them. But so they set up their court, and they now have ways in which the arresting officer, who may already know the history of this person, will talk to the judge and say, you know, they were off their medication, they agreed that they're going to take the medication, we don't really think they need to sit in jail for a week before the next hearing, and we feel pretty comfortable with that. They've got a parole officer, they've got all of them are working together. And so that person went from the first year of implementing the system from 75 to 25, and then the year after that they went down to 5. And one of their biggest problems was calling 911 repeatedly, and then they'd have to go respond. And so it not only was taking up all these other people's time, it was messing up 911 time. So it was an interesting thing to watch, and they've said that it's happened over and over again with lots of their people. And one of the most tragic ones, they said, was a young man who decided to go, became diagnosed right after this incident, schizophrenic, and it had not had any. He was an honor student doing really well. All of a sudden had a psychotic event on I-5 while he was driving, which resulted in an accident and other kinds of stuff, ended up in jail. And because of their court and how they worked, they recognized what was going on. He got the help he needed, and he is today a productive member of our society on his drugs, doing the right kinds of things. And this particular event did not destroy his whole life, which oftentimes it can. So how do we as a society understand those things and make those things, and if you have ideas that would be helpful? We have tried different things at our school, mostly in the mental field, and I'm hoping that the new work that is being done in Oregon around the transformation of the medical society system will in fact start putting mental health and physical health together so that we can solve the same problems. And maybe that will help us start to move towards a solution for some of the violence that takes place in our society, and in particular around schools. So to me, this is a really complex subject that goes back to how parents raise their kids. It goes back to how kids are treated by other kids. It goes how there are all these different things that interact with causing situations where individual people feel hopeless and want to make a statement because they can't get their voice heard any other way. And we end up with a problem at a school or at other public venue. And as a society, I think we have an obligation to try to work on that. And it's, I think, all society's responsibility. And that's why it's great to see all the different people who are here. And what we end up doing is we end up relying on our police forces to try to help make us safe in situations where they have not been given the training or the help to deal with some of the people that we tell them to keep us safe from, when in fact they really need the professional help from the psychiatrists and psychologists. And they do the job that they can do, but even they recognize, and that's what came out clear in our conversations last Friday, we knew right up front that this was not something we are going to solve. We could put a person in jail, we could lock them up and do whatever we needed to do, but they needed help that we couldn't give them. And we knew it was not something we could handle in this new system that's actually happening in Marion County. They even have a response team that's made up of a trained public health official and a police officer. So when they get cases, they have a pretty good understanding. As long as they can keep that person safe, they will take both of them to the meeting. And that oftentimes that professional psychologist can help get the situation calmed down to the point where they can take the person in custody and do things. As they said, the only thing we aren't going to do is put somebody else at risk. And that's the public safety's job. The officer, it's their job to make sure that they intercede when it's the life of safety is in danger. But if they can do that, they have been able to successfully cause a lot less problems because of the coordination between the different agencies. And I hope we can have conversations. I want to thank, particularly as high school principal, our police in Coos Bay came and practiced regularly after Thurston thing at our high school about how they would intercede in anything. If you've ever been to the Marshall campus, it is ridiculous. If you check the number of entrances and exits, the high points and low points. And I found out a lot more about my high school than I ever really wanted to know. As the city sniper would say, I need that area. How do I get there? How do I, do all this kind of thing? It was kind of scary to recognize that it is such a difficult area to try to deal with. But I will tell you one last thing is that the more knowledge you have about the situations and the way I feel it, the better off we all are. So hopefully this will give all of us the kind of information we need. Because I didn't claim to be a law enforcement professional, and they did, and I was more than happy to make sure that they had the keys and information about how to get where they needed to go. So, thank you for being here. Okay.
Keith, do you have a couple minutes?
Sure.
To follow up this?
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay. I want to come back to one thing that we touched on that for me is paramount, because I've worked in this world for a very long time, and it has to do with high school counselors. We saw a decline in student counselor ratios in the late 80s, 90s. It's continued on in Oregon over the last few years. Our counselors are way overburdened. Our counselor loads are high in the United States. We have anywhere from 200 to 300 to 400 students per counselor. Counselors do a lot of putting out fires these days, and the things that they're charged with these incredible loads that they carry make it really difficult to get this good work done, I think, that we're talking about today. And I want to put a pitch in for not only great training for high school counselors in this regard and elementary school counselors, for them at the graduate level coursework that they take to be able to begin to identify students who may be getting off track, either with a mental health issue or with bullying or with something that's going on in their lives, either at home or at school, that's putting them at risk of hurting themselves or hurting others. And a lot of this comes back to school funding. I mean, the reason that we have high counselor student loads is because education funding has diminished, and that's an area where schools can cut and not impact class size. So it historically has been where we have lost personnel. And I'm not sure that's served us well over the years. And I'm going to bring it back to, I think, the economic recovery that we see for this region and this state and this nation, where we can actually put more resources towards these things in the actual school building that are going to help us accomplish what we want to accomplish, and that is trying to identify these kids who are going to put themselves or put our other students and our staff at risk.
One last one as well. The other thing that we noticed at our school that hurt with all this stuff also was the loss of a school nurse. We used to have a regular school nurse at our school 24/7, and I didn't realize how important it was until I took over as dean, and the nurse we had was going through her own cancer treatment, so she was gone a lot. And I found out how many kids came to the office and needed to take care of different kinds of things. And all of a sudden we became the depository for all the drugs. We had our locked cabinet so that they could come and take their medications, which was really important. We didn't think of it as our job necessarily to make sure that they took them. The school nurse did, however. And, you know, we've gone away from some of those things, and we think that they aren't as important because the class size is important. But I will tell you that those kids that were like me, that were hyperactive, it's night and day when they're doing the right prescription, when they're not doing the right prescription. And when you are ADHD, you really don't have the governors that most people have in their brain that tells them that this is not a good thing to do. You know, I remember having competitions in my middle school, jumping off the back stairs to see how far you could jump down the stairs. Destroyed both ankles, I had a lot of other problems, but I was not willing to not take the chance if somebody else was. I was always going to go there. So I know how it is when you don't have those internal governors that say, this is really stupid. And we have a lot of those kids that have some of those kinds of issues. And when they're medicated, the whole world's a different place for them, for their families, and for the schools that have them. So having school nurses that understand some of those things, really, really important. And I will tell you that as we have had less of that and more for people, I have had the ongoing belief that, you know, we've got to start figuring out how to do things like have the county health department have the ability to be in the schools and share some of these resources, because they're the same people that they work with and their families outside. Couldn't we figure out how to get them a place where they could visit the schools and be a part of that whole thing as well? Isn't there a way to figure those things out? I believe there is, and I think as we talk about this medical transformation, we're talking about how people work together. You know, we talk about the educational transformation, getting kids when they're really early in their lives. I think we have an opportunity right now to start having real conversations about how do we share information, how do we work together to help each of those kids get to their greatest potential, and each of those families a safer environment, which leads to a safer environment for communities. So, thanks.
And already, just in comments from Arnie and Caddy, I've been scribbling notes, and I'm hoping, or I'm imagining that's what everybody else is doing too, because there's some things that I didn't anticipate walking out of here with, and yet I already have. Talking to Laura Osborne, who you'll see in a little bit, our counselor. I love Arnie's comment about 1,200 pairs of eyes at Marshfield High School, and we have 400 pairs of eyes here at Reedsport High School, and yet I've never really thought of it in exactly that regard, and I think that that's something that is very valuable. I just told Laura, man, I got to do that. We got to talk to kids, and we got to have an assembly, and I've got to get in front of kids and say, you guys are really the first line of defense in many ways in making our schools safe. So if you're involved in the schools, I'm certainly hoping that that's something that we can all carry forward. It's a simple thing that we all think about it, but it's a powerful way to phrase it. And I appreciate that, Arnie, thank you. We talked about resource officers, and one of the things that I encourage you to do if you're at the county level or community level, Reedsport, we currently don't have a resource officer in our schools. We have had, and I think we had a very efficient and unique way of funding that, rather than putting the burden entirely on the schools for the resource officer or on the city for the police time. We actually had a shared responsibility here in Reedsport when we did that. It was jointly funded by the schools, by the city, and by the local hospital as well, who shared the funding for that position for the nine months, and that way the hospital saw it as a health issue as well, the city saw it as a law enforcement issue, and the schools certainly saw it as a school safety issue. And so it's something probably that we'll have to revisit from time to time, and especially with tough economies, that's something that small towns often find a way to remove from their budgets, and understandably, but we also have to try to find ways to identify places where we can pop that back into the budget. I think both Arnie and Caddy talked about economic recovery, and it's probably the one thing that we can best do for our schools and for a lot of the mental health. When Rudy Crew was at the South Coast a couple of months ago, he's the education czar for the governor. I had a chance to sit with him, and I said, really the best thing you can do for South Coast schools is the state can help us with economic recovery. And that's not a handout at all, but let's find a way to put people back to work in our South Coast schools and all of our coastal schools. And I think you're going to see a real improvement in the mental health in those places, because families will be less stressed, children will be more secure, and schools will be more safe. And something that else came up, and I think that this goes along with the 1,200 pairs of eyes. We need in our communities, I think, and especially into the schools, but a way that people who have concerns about particular students or particular school safety issues have a known place to call, and a number where they can give information and say, this is concerning. We have a world filled with social media that I know nothing about. I have no clue. I've never Facebooked in my life. And yet there are people who see that all the time, and that's where we need to encourage students as well, that 1,200 pairs of eyes. And not only within a school, but because social media is indeed worldwide, that it's a way that students stay in touch with one another in other schools. And they too need a place to come and say, hey, Mrs. Osborne, I'm concerned about my friend who's going to Marshfield High School, because these are the comments they've made, and how do we make that contact, and how do we accurately get that information. Schools are never going to be entirely safe. I'll point this out, that the Newtown shooting, that school had a state-of-the-art school safety system set in. You had to be buzzed into the school. Yet the tragedy occurred. I don't know how many entrances there are to Marshfield High School. I think we just recently identified, Chief, whether it's 16 or 18, something like that, into this high school. So there's 16 or 18 different doors that get you into the high school. And you can't lock every door, because we have buildings where students may have to go to the office, and you can't lock them out of the main part of the building. And so it's not simply an answer that works to say we're going to lock every door and not going to unlock it until the bell rings and go between classes, because kids have legitimate needs, and people move around in a community, and people move around in our schools as well. And I think that the next thing I'd like to do is I'm going to invite up Mark Vandry, Reedsport Police Chief. I'm going to invite up Laura Davis, the principal here, and Laura Osborne, who is our school counselor. And I want to point out that, as both Arnie and Caddy have done, counselors do a lot more than just counseling. You know, I've been around for a long time, 32 years for me too now, Arnie. And what you find is that counselors become resources and for a lot of other services as well. They become academic advisors, but they also become schedule makers and schedule masters, and they become college advisors, and a lot of what they do, in fact, most of what school counselors do is not counseling mental illness, it's doing all the other things. And those are incredibly important, but we need to find a way to at least allow our counselors in the schools as much mental illness time as we can fit within the schedule. So if Mark Vandry and Laura Davis and Laura Osborne would come up, I'd like this to be a part of the conversation where they're going to talk a little bit about what happened in Reedsport, our lockdown, the lessons we've learned, what we did well, what we didn't do well, and then I would encourage not just questions but comments from people and officials, community, county, law enforcement officials, and governmental officials, judges, on what might we do and their experience in similar situations and what worked, and make this next part a little bit more of a give and take. And I wanted to point out one thing. I tried to figure out what was going on with the light, and I decided that this is probably the first time we've held a meeting of this sort in the South Coast where Senator Joanne Berger was not here. So I think it's just Joanne reminding us that she still is here. She's omnipotent, as you well know. And it takes a community to raise a village. I'll point out, I was busily borrowing Laura's pen, and I give it back, and I borrow it again to scribble, and give it back, and borrow it again. Sarah Haas from our local newspaper reached over and jabbed me and gave me one of hers. And so not only does it take a village to raise a child, it takes a village to raise an idiot. I'm the idiot for not having a pen. So Mark and Laura, the floor is yours.